Good morning. How's everybody doing? I know you can't answer that back, I'm realizing. That's not, but quickly before we go any further, I'm trying to remember this. If you do not have a family report, there are some nice gentlemen in the back that would happily give you one. Just raise your hand, let them know, and they will get one to you. While they're doing that, just a couple of small announcements. One, in the family report, the next date for the teen study is December 12th, and that's at our house. Starting in the new year, we're going to try and have it sometimes at our house and sometimes rotated to other folks who want to volunteer. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to talk to me about that. Also, be aware, we're now heading into the final month of the year, so be aware that in the weeks to come, we're going to be having more conversations about what 2022 sounds like. It sounds really weird to even say it, but we are marching towards the new year very quickly, and so be prepared to see things coming up as we prepare to kick off next year. Okay, Jeremiah 17. In the Jeremiah class, we recently covered this verse, and every once in a while when I'm teaching, I think I don't have enough time to give this topic what it deserves. So I shove it into the sermon category. And that's what happened here. In Jeremiah 17, verse 9, it says, "The heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it?" I have a neighbor, younger guy, used to be wildly active, still is a football coach, but has a very hard time even doing that. Used to play very actively and then got in a brutal accident, car accident. And his body has just been devastated by the damage in that car wreck. And he's had multiple surgeries. He has another one coming up. Guy's been through it. And one of the things, as he and I have talked, that has been one of the hardest is in his mind, he can do certain things. In his mind, he can get up, he can lift weights, he can go run, he can do simple things like just get out of a chair, go get a glass of water, walk back, sit down. In his mind, all of those things happen very, very easily. But his body is a different story. There's a unique sense of betrayal when you are the problem. It isn't some external thing. I know what to do when I pick up a flower and the rose, the thorn on the stem stabs me. I have something I can focus my frustration at. I can be mad at the thorn and the plant. If I get bit by a snake, I have an object of my wrath to unleash on. But what if I'm the thing that is the problem? What if it's my own body, or as Jeremiah says, what if it is my own heart? The heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. The heart is capable of a great deal of deception. Think of the wars that have been fought and the lives that have been lost because somebody thought it would be a really great idea. Think of the abuse that has happened behind closed doors in families because somebody, in the moment, their heart, enthralled with passion, made decisions that were abusive and violent. Think of the families that have been destroyed, the hatred that has been unleashed, the violations and adultery that have been committed, all in the name of doing whatever my heart wanted. If there's anything we've learned through human history and human interaction is that our hearts seem to have a problem. We have a sickness of the heart, and it affects the way that we live, it affects the way that we interact with each other, it affects the choices that we make, and it affects our future. We're told to follow our heart by the culture that we live in. It is a common saying, follow your heart. But you would never allow yourself to be led by somebody you can't trust. And every day you are taught by your very existence or your very heart that you cannot trust it. Jeremiah is a book about the deception of the human heart and how when we do whatever we feel is right, we end up in places we do not wish to be. It is not in man to direct his steps. As Cole read in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, we are told to watch over our heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. And I had him read the larger section because all the context around it points to the same idea. Caution, great, great caution. Watch out. Watch your heart because from it flow the springs of life. I had a leak in my water system. And so I get a bill in the mail. And at first I'm like, oh, apparently Kentucky water's expensive. That was not it. Apparently water is normal price in Kentucky, but you're just not supposed to use like 10 times the amount. Well, at first it didn't even register in my mind that there could be a water leak. So I go out to the meter, pull off the cap, and I look down there, and if you ever get bored, you can go look at your water meter, and there's typically like 3 little dials. There's a big dial, and that's the one if you're using gallons and gallons of water. Like if you had a giant pipe burst and flooding your kitchen, that one's spinning. And then there's another one, and that one will spin, if the sink's on. And then there's this little tiny one. It doesn't even have numbers with it. It's just a little triangle. And it moves with the smallest amount of water. And I looked at that thing, and the first time I looked at the water meter, I thought, no, I don't have a leak. But then I stared at it for about 20 seconds, which to stare at something that's boring is a long time. And all of a sudden, that little triangle started to twist. I thought, oh no. For from it flowed the springs of life. The problem with your heart is not the big meter, it's the little one. It's not the big voices, it's the little voices in there that are so deceptive. It's the little voices that tell you to do something, and in the moment it seemed like such a great idea. But that's where the water leaks come in. We're not told to follow our heart in the Bible. Proverbs 4 verse 23 says, watch it, not follow it. The exact opposite. I follow things I trust. I watch things I don't. We used to have a dog that was the kindest, most wonderful dog to my wife. And that's where the relationship began and ended. That dog moved in, and all of a sudden I was an interloper in the house. I did not belong. And it was the ugliest dog. Big snarled tooth came out, and he would stare at me. And this dog would stare at me, and I would be making food and going to sit down to eat it. And that dog would have sat there like a lamb for my wife. And just with adoring eyes watched her eat a meal. Me, that dog would wait for a second where he could steal my food. He would do it in a heartbeat. No loyalty, no kindness. So I ate with one eye cocked this way at all times because I didn't trust him. We watch what we don't trust. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Watch the words we say to ourselves. Watch the things you feed your heart. Watch the fears that speak to your heart, and watch the hunger it calls with. We're going to look at some of those deceptions of the heart that sneak in like the tiny meter and water leaks. Watch your heart. I want you to watch your heart for and fault finding. In Numbers chapter 11, verse 1, it says, the people became like those who complain of adversity. Speaking of the children of Israel in the wilderness, they became like those who complain of adversity in the hearing of the Lord. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. I want you to watch out for complaining, because complaining is a sin. And I want you to watch out for complaining, because we complain for a variety of reasons. And one of them is mentioned here in Numbers 11. We complain when things become hard. Complaining at its root is a very simple thing. It is being discontent with your portion. It is being discontent with your portion. Godliness is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. Guess what complaining it is? Discontentment. They are not able to coexist together. You cannot be both content and complaining at the same time. It's an interesting thing to me that every generation has the exact same thing, so much so that we have a joke about it, that every generation seems to tell the previous one. In my day, when I was a kid and I walked to school uphill both ways in the snow. My grandfather walked uphill both ways in the snow. My father walked uphill both ways in the snow, and now I walk uphill both ways in the snow. My family has been breaking the laws of physics for generations. And the reason that we tell those sorts of things, that's a human thing. The reason that many of you chuckled at that, thank you, by the way. The reason is because that is a human experience. That what we tend to do is we look to the next generation and say, they don't know what hard looks like. In my day, it was really hard. And they've got it so easy today. Every generation does that, and I'm convinced there's a reason for it. It's because every generation does tend to complain with adversity. When we're old, we forgot that we did it. And so when we see the next generation doing it, we go, you know, they weren't tough like me. Oh, you mean when you were crying over there? When things were difficult? You mean the next generation's not tough like you, like when you were worried all the time and saying life is hard? You just forgot that part. You cut yourself out of that part of the story. We repaint ourselves as uphill both ways in the snow. But the reality is that every generation will have to deal with adversity. It is your lot under the sun. And though it is a common human experience to complain through adversity, it is not a godly common experience. It is something that we as Christians should seek to transcend. Because our lot that we should be content with is from the Lord. My portion is from Him. So learning to understand that it may be hard right now, but that's okay. That He will see me through it. Your heart will want to complain. You need to tell your heart something different. We also have a tendency to complain against brethren. Now this is a truism of life, that the closer you are to people, the more likely you are to complain about them. Or to be upset with them. Y'all had Thanksgiving, didn't you? Some of it might have been awkward. Because when we're close to people, they tend to get the full force of us. The guy at the bus stop gets the best version of me. Because in that small moment, I only have to give him a shallow view of myself and no more. But when we begin to have relationships with people, that's where complaining becomes easy. In James chapter 5, verse 9, James will say, do not complain, brethren, against one another. Do not complain against one another so that you yourselves may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing right at the door. One of the things that your heart will tell you, that deceptive, sick part of your heart, is it will whisper to you that everybody else is the problem. And I can't believe that they treated me that way. And I can't believe they think that way. And it's just not fair. And I have it worse. And don't they understand? The same heart that calls for compassion from your fellow man to you does not desire to offer it back. So watch out for that voice that paints others in the worst light and you in the best light. When congregations divide, sometimes it's doctrinal. Sometimes. But I will tell you many times the reason the congregations divide has nothing to do with doctrine. It has everything to do with feelings. And at some point, I decided to say in my heart that it's not fair how you're treating me. And you said in your heart, it's not fair how he's treating me. And the battle lines were drawn. And we're no longer family, but we're warriors against each other. James knew that could happen. Because it's the family dynamic, isn't it? Families can love each other deeper than any other sort of relationship. But boy, can they grab hold and make a fist just as well. We make choices which one we will be. The destiny of the Eastland family, we know what God wants. We know what He wants. He wants unity. He wants family. He wants closeness. We just get to decide what we're going to be. Will we listen to Him? Or will we listen to our own heart when we decide, I'd like to complain because so-and-so did this, or the elders made that decision. And by the way, I'm bringing this up because there's not that going on right now. I'm not bringing it up in the middle of a problem. You bring it up now, right? Because we set in our hearts right now who we're going to be before the difficult times come. In Jude will say in verse 16, these are grumblers, finding fault, following after their own lusts. They speak arrogantly, flattering people for the sake of gaining an advantage. Jude points out that one of the characteristics of people who destroy congregations and those who are displeasing to God are those who grumble and find fault. Because it's so much easier to be a fault finder than to be a problem solver, isn't it? Watched the football game, sat down in my comfortable couch, and I made every right decision for the quarterback. It's the classic, right? It's the armchair quarterback position. Some of you may have heard this speech, and I'm not going to give it its entirety, but I would recommend, of the great speeches to be read, Teddy Roosevelt was in Paris, France in 1910, and he gave a speech. The full speech is Citizenship in a Republic. The part that he's most well known for is the man in the arena. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. It's so much easier to be a critic, and your heart knows it. Don't let yourself be deceived. The Lord wants us to be doers, not fault finders. A congregation full of people doing doesn't have time to find fault. We're too busy making the mistakes. I mean, that's the irony of it, right? As if we're busy working and serving and helping, we're making mistakes left and right in that process. It's a constant battle of mistakes along the way to serve. It's the man in the arena. But when we work, we have no time to find the faults in others because we're striving to be who we ought to be. It's just a deception of the heart. If I complain, that's as good as doing. The second deception I want you to watch out for is the deception of misguided worship. I want you to watch out for misguided worship. In 2 Kings chapter 18 in verse 4, it lists in the history of the Chronicles of the Kings that there came a time where they began to remove some of the high places. And in 2 Kings 18 verse 4 it says, he removed the high places, broke down the sacred pillars, and cut down the Asherah. He also broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days the sons of Israel burned incense to it, and it was called Nehushtan. If you go back in the history of Israel, in the wilderness, there was a time where there were fiery serpents and they were biting the people, and the people who got bit died. And so God had Moses to make a bronze serpent and to put it up on a staff, on a pole, so that anybody who was bitten would run and look at the bronze serpent and be healed. And when all of that was over, after all the people had been healed and the serpents were gone, what did the people do with the bronze serpent? They worshiped it. They allowed their adoration to be focused on the thing given to them instead of the giver. And we do this all the time with God. God gives you a home, He gives you a job, He gives you financial well-being and prosperity, and we worship money. Covetousness, which is idolatry. The Lord gives us children, a blessing from Him. And then those children become such a focus of our life that we don't raise them in the fear and admonition of the Lord because we're too busy worshiping the kids and giving them whatever they want in the moment. God gives us freedom. The freedom to go live our lives and pursue our desires, to work with our hands, and as Ecclesiastes says, enjoy the fruit of our labor. And this is a gift from God. And we take that ability to do that and we make it God. So that recreation, so that pleasure becomes the thing that gets our hearts. We make our bronze serpents. We take the thing that God had given to us for good and we turn it into the thing that we adore instead of Him. We confuse, in misguided worship, we also confuse action with obedience. If you turn in your Bible to 1 Samuel chapter 15. In 1 Samuel 15, we have the account of Saul, who'd been told to wipe out the Amalekites. And this is a passage that we'll often use to talk about Bible authority and how you have to do what God says. But in 1 Samuel chapter 5, when they came back after not wiping out the Amalekites, but bringing back the best of the animals, bringing back the king, it says in verse 10, the word of the Lord came to Samuel saying, I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my commands. And Samuel was distressed, and he cried out to the Lord all night. And Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul. And it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a monument for himself, and then turned and proceeded on down to Gilgal. And then Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, I want you to look very closely at the very first thing that he said to him. Blessed are you of the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord. God is deeply upset with Saul. Samuel is deeply upset with Saul. God had given him a job to do. And Saul went and did something different. It's not that he did nothing. He did something different. He killed the people he wanted to kill. He kept the stuff that he wanted to keep. And he built a monument to himself. And he's come down from Carmel. And man, look at this. I've been active. And the confusion between action and obedience is clear in this man's heart. I have fulfilled the command of the Lord. I did what God said. No, you did. Saul, you did. But doing what God commanded and doing are not the same thing. We live our lives and we do things. And then we say, but I'm such a good person. I'm doing this and I'm doing that. I'm doing the other thing. And first off, nobody gets to heaven because they're a good person unless your name is Jesus. And 2, just because you're doing doesn't mean you're obeying. You ask people across the nation, and everybody's busy. Everybody's busy. There may be that one guy's like, I just have nothing. I do nothing. But for the most part, when you talk to people, they're busy with their lives. They're going here, they're doing this, and they're busy with things that seem important to them. And we say, of course, I'm a good person. And we confuse action with obedience. They're not the same thing. Doing what God says and doing, not the same sentence. And then I also want you to be aware of the idols that you bring with you, because your heart does that too. In Acts chapter 7, and I'm not going to go there, but you can read as Stephen gives an account of the history of the nation of Israel. A detail that he adds in there is that when they left Egypt, they brought the false gods of Egypt with them on the journey. So as they walked through the Red Sea on dry ground, with all of their worldly possessions, as God saved them from the Egyptian army, they had packed with them idols. And we all do the same thing. When you became a Christian, you had idols. You had things that had your heart. The covetousness, which is idolatries. The things that were so important to you, and you didn't even know you were packing them. And what I want you to do is, along the way of your journey as a Christian, I want you to think of part of what you're doing is, as you're journeying through the wilderness of this life, every time you come across one of those idols that you had packed in your bag, I want you to realize what it is, and I want you to leave it behind. Because there are things in your life right now that are more valuable to you than obeying God. Because all of us have verses that when we read them, we really know what it means and what we should do about it, but then we don't. And there's always a good excuse. There's always a reason for it. I have my laundry list of them. I'm one of the best rationalizers in the world. I can preach things and then do the opposite like a champion. It's a gift. You've got a list of excuses why. But I want you to get rid of the list, and I want you to get rid of the idols. And I want you to get rid of the excuses, and I want you to replace them with obedience to God. Don't listen to your heart that's told you it's not that big of a deal, or you'll get to it later. The next thing I want you to watch in your heart is I want your heart to watch for fears. Your heart is something that can control you simply by fear. In Numbers 13, verse 25 through 29, when the spies came back from spying out the land, it says, at the end of 40 days they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron, to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. If you happen to catch some of the kids, they were enacting this not too long ago in one of their kids' classes, bringing back the fruit of the land. Big, bountiful fruit. It was a wonderful land that they had spied out. And that's what they said in verse 27. They told him, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. The most terrifying word in that passage is however. The land is flowing with milk and honey. It is a bountiful land with many great things. It's all that God said it would be. However, it's going to be hard. That's the however. That's the but in the sentence. God has told me to do this. I know the life that He has for me to live, and He's always been faithful and it's always worked out, but it's the excuse our heart gives out of fear. And we know how it turned out for that nation that wouldn't take the land, and that generation that all died in the wilderness. So your heart will get afraid because it's meant to get afraid when things start to get hard and scary. You're designed by God to have fear. Fear is a good thing. You get to the edge of the Grand Canyon, you start getting close, and you start feeling stuff that tells you back up. And that's okay. That's a perfectly appropriate reaction. But sometimes you get that feeling and it keeps you from doing the stuff that you ought to do. There is a fear of heights that is perfectly appropriate and will keep you safe. And there's a fear of heights that keeps you off a stepladder. And they both come from the same place, but they have opposite reactions to your life. One protects you, the other keeps you from getting stuff done. And the fact is that we confuse the idea that something being hard means I shouldn't do it. That's not true. In fact, if you want to, I'm going to sum up your entire Bible for you. You can either do what you want or you can do the right thing. That's your whole Bible. You can either do what you want or you can do the right thing. Because almost all cases, the thing that you ought to do is the thing you don't want to do. That there's a whole list of fears as to if I do that thing, this will happen. Fear happens when we have to wait. In Exodus 32, when Moses went up on the mountaintop, the whole reason the golden calf happened is it says when Moses was delayed. He was up there 40 days and they said, oh, we don't know when he's coming down, so let's make another god. The amount of times in life where your job is to wait. Be still and know that I am God. Don't let fear dictate action when you ought to be patient. Or inaction due to fear. In Matthew 25, you have the man with 5 talents, the man with 2 talents, the one talented man. And the one talented man, he got in trouble not because he had 1 talent. He got in trouble because he buried that talent. And his excuse was, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground. And here you have what is yours. You notice? Why did he bury his talent? Why did he dig a hole and put it down there? Fear. Fear causes us to do nothing. And when we do nothing, Satan is happy. I want you to watch your heart for cravings. We'll cover this one fairly quickly. Sometimes you want stuff that is a bad idea. Some of you may have had this experience on Thursday. You had food, you ate food, you were full. It was perfect. The equilibrium between your taste buds and the fullness of your stomach was exactly as it ought to be. And then you said, just one more helping. And as soon as you ate it, you said that was a mistake. Sometimes you want stuff and you crave stuff and it's not good for you. We don't always want what is right. You can see that in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. When they made the golden calf, 1 Corinthians chapter 10 says, they sat down to eat and drink and they rose up to play. It was recreation and passion and desires. And I also want you to understand that zeal and passion are amoral in and of themselves. There's an account in Numbers 25 of a man named Phinehas and a spear. Awesome account. Don't have time to cover it all. But the beginning of it starts with the nation of Israel being passionate for foreign women and getting themselves into a great deal of trouble because of that passion. And it ends with God checking a plague on the nation because of a man named Phinehas who was passionate and zealous like God is and drove a spear through two people. And the point of that story is passion started it and passion ended it. Passion when directed towards immoral things is evil. Passion when directed towards moral things is good. It is a tool, but you can use it for good or for bad. You can build houses with bricks. You can also break windows. Do not confuse your desire for something with it being right. Your heart is deceitful. It will tell you that you want it. It will not tell you whether you should want it. They are different things. And last, your heart is deceitful when it comes to memories. Watch for inaccurate memories in your life. In Exodus 16, in verse 2 and 3, it says, when the nation was grumbling, it says, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the sons of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. When I read the beginning of the Exodus account, I guess I missed the part where there were pots of meat. I don't remember that back in Egypt. Do you? Funny how your brain twists things, isn't it? It tweaks it to say what we want and remember things the way we want. Our hearts will twist it to fit our narrative at the moment. At the moment, they're not happy, so the past was so much better. The current crisis will always emotionally win the argument. In Numbers chapter 21, the people in Numbers 21 had just won this great victory, and God had given them the great victory. And so then, after winning a battle, He sends them off, and they're following the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. And then in Numbers chapter 21 and verse 5, after they've been following that for a while, and God's been taking them on a path that seemed a little detourish to them, it says, and the people became impatient because of the journey. Their previous experience was, when we got ourselves in a pickle, God led us to the victory. That's the experience, that's the memory, the last one they had. But now that things are not going the way they want and they're impatient, they begin to grumble against God. How often are we the same way? History is only valuable, your memory is only valuable for forward propulsion. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 10, do not say, why is it that the former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this. Uphill, both ways, in the snow. There's no wisdom in comparing today to the past, unless it's for forward propulsion. If I'm looking back at the past to say, what kind of person can I be today to be a better person? Great, do that all day long. That's an excellent use of history. But if you are using history as a way to complain about today, be not deceived by that sick heart that whispers the wrong things. Because instead, in the end, what we want to be is people who, as Luke 6 says, a good person produces good out of the good stored up in his heart. Your heart is not meant to be left to its own devices. Instead, you're to store up the right things in it. And the more we store up the right things in it, the more that you're going to be calibrated for life the way you ought to be. God does not intend for you to follow your heart, but for you to train it, to master it, to store up good things in it, and then to produce fruit with the life you've been given. This time we're going to have an invitation song. Number 280, I believe. Is that right, Scott? 280. If you have not obeyed the gospel, if you're not yet a Christian, don't wait. Today can be the beginning of your life. You can be born again. The water's ready. We'd be happy to help you begin that new life with Christ. And if you are a Christian who needs the help and the support of the saints, we're family. We're here for each other. If we can help you, please let us know as we stand and sing the invitation song.